Hello landlords, it's Ernie, your landlord attorney, and today we're talking all about keys. When do you give them over? Let's get started. So we're going to jump right in, and this first one is probably going to be pretty obvious, but don't hand over keys until the unit is completely ready for move-in. Sometimes we get a little anxious, or sometimes the tenant gets a little anxious, and you and the tenant work out a side deal where you say, well, I wasn't really done with the flooring, but I'll get it done within a week. And they said, no, don't worry about it. We'll be fine. That's never a good position to take. If the unit simply is not move-in ready, don't hand over those keys. Additionally, don't ever give keys to someone who promises that they will do any work for you. If the unit is ready, it's ready. Don't delay any of the work that needs to be done to make it ready, and definitely don't hire your tenant to do any of that work for you. You're just asking for trouble. Number two, always do your background check in the application portion of your investigation of your prospective tenants before you ever hand over those keys. Don't have the regret of having allowed someone to enter onto the property and then later you find out they were evicted 5 times, or their credit score doesn't make them a good candidate for this particular rental, or perhaps they've got a criminal record longer than the lease. Additionally, if you've never verified their income until sometime after they've taken possession, it's way too late. Make sure that all of your background checks are 100% done. Don't skip any of them because you got a really good feeling about this tenant. Make sure they're all 100% done before you hand over that key. The third key for you to consider is the documents. Has everything already been signed by all of the necessary parties? Don't hand over that key unless you've got a signed contract in your hands. Don't be that landlord who leases out and has given their signed copy to the tenant and is waiting in good faith for the tenant to return it to them. That's a recipe for disaster. The key in exchange for items 1, 2, and now 3, a signed copy of all the documents. And that includes any pet addenda, it includes any documents including the lease, or in some cases, particularly with commercial units, a guarantee to that lease. Each of these documents should be signed by you and, more importantly, by your tenant, returned to you before you ever consider handing over those keys. So many times we have clients who come over and say, well, this was the document we gave the tenant, but they didn't actually sign it. And now they want me to enforce elements of that contract against someone who never actually agreed to the terms. It doesn't work that way. The fact that you signed it is not enough. The fact that they promised that they would sign it is not enough. Make sure that your tenant has actually signed the lease and returned it to you well in advance of you ever handing over the key. I hope you're enjoying what you see today. If so, give us a thumbs up, click that like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Follow us on Instagram, join our Facebook group, and if you have a question for us, don't hesitate to send us a text or give us a call at the number on your screen. Number 4 is the big one, and probably the most important thing you need to consider before you hand over this key. Have they paid in full the first month's rent and the entire security deposit? I know. You're thinking to yourself, look, they're having a hard time, or things have been tough, or man, that's a lot of money. Yes, these are all considerations that you can make, but they're also clues that the tenant may not be appropriate for this particular tenancy. If that's the case and they're unable to pay that first month's rent and security deposit, that's a pretty good indication that down the line they're going to have difficulty paying the money that they owe. You want someone who can comfortably pay the first month's rent and their security deposit, because that indicates to you that going forward they will always have enough money to pay the amounts that are owed. If right at the starting line they're telling you they're having trouble paying what's owed, you can almost guarantee that in the future you're going to hear excuses when rent is owed or other fees that come into play after property is destroyed or late charges have accrued. You can avoid that if you know before you ever hand over that key that the tenant simply is unable to pay a full month's rent and a security deposit at the beginning of the deal. And so you may never want to hand over the key in that situation, and you may pass on that tenant because you know they're not an appropriate fit for you. And the final thing to do before you hand over the key is to have the talk with your tenant. Before you leave the table and the key is in their hands, make sure they know 3 things about the way that you handle your tenancy. The first of which is how you collect rent. It's in the lease, or it should be, it's in the lease explained in black and white, but you should go over with them what acceptable methods you have of collecting the rent. What app might they use, or what bank account is associated with this particular rental. You want them to know and be certain of how they are going to pay rent in the future. Do you use some kind of tenant management software with a tenant portal where everything can be done online? Make sure they understand that process. How is rent paid, and what happens if rent remains unpaid? You should be very clear that within a certain number of days of non-payment, you're going to send them a notice to vacate. And you can be very frank with them and say, look, this is nothing personal against you, but as part of my normal course, once you reach a certain date, maybe it's the 5th or the 10th, that's completely up to you, but once you reach a certain date, you will send a notice to vacate. At what point do you decide, I've waited long enough, I'm going to enforce the terms of my lease and send a notice to vacate? Make sure that you do this consistently with all of your tenants and that you are upfront with them before you hand over the key. You are likelier to prevent an incident of non-payment in this case. Next, you want to have the talk about your house rules. Do you have specific things that come up on your property that are not common? Maybe you have a swimming pool, or maybe you have a particularly strict homeowners association that requires X and Y and Z every single month, and these obligations now pass on to your tenants. If you have very specific house rules before you hand over this key, make sure that you have established those rules with your tenant. And the last thing that you want to cover in the talk with your tenant before you hand over the key is inspections. When do you come in? And I also recommend scheduling those inspections. In a prior video, I explained how on the 3rd month and the 9th month, there's a pretty good rule of thumb to go in and have an inspection. So if you are leasing to someone on January 1st, then maybe after the completion of 3 months, on April 1st, you say, I'm coming to check to see just how things are going. Make sure that everything's working. Make sure that there's no problems with the roof or the walls, the plumbing, the flooring. You're just going to do a quick examination for your benefit and theirs. Then you'll come back after 9 months to see how things are wrapping up with your 1-year lease. This is going to prevent any major catastrophic problems, but it's also going to give you an idea of how things are going. And assuming that you want to renew, you'll be able to use the idea of the condition of the premises after 3 months and the condition of the premises after 9 months. If it still looks pretty good and in the same or even better shape than you gave it to them, then of course you want to sign a new lease with these clients. But if you see a drastic change from month 3 to month 9 and the condition of the premises has deteriorated significantly, number 1, you may have a cause of action for eviction, but number 2, you know very well that you're not likely going to sign a new lease with these particular tenants, and you can take the necessary steps to lease the property to a new set of prospective tenants, or at least get the ball rolling in that direction. So before you hand over the key, make sure you've had the talk. Landlords, I've given you 5 really great tips that you should know before you ever hand over the key to your prospective tenant. Make sure you've done all 5 of these, and your landlording experience is going to be significantly better. For additional information on how to manage your property, there's a video right here. I suggest you check it out. And until next time, happy leasing.